Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Bharatvaarta podcast. I'm your host for the day, Srivatsa Subbanna. In September 2019, the Indian government had introduced an FDI regime for entities engaged in digital news media. In addition, the government also changed supervision of digital media from Ministry of Electronics and IT to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. To discuss the implications of these changes on media as a whole and digital media and the evolution of digital news media, we have with us two very distinguished guests. First up, we have Muthuraman Natarajan, who's the co founder and CFO at Swarajya. He's also the co founder at Riverbridge Investment Advisors, a boutique consulting and investment banking firm focused on SMEs. Hi, Muthu. How are you?
Hi, Srivatsa. Good to be here.
Thanks. Next, we also have Sreemoy Talukdar, who you may have heard on an earlier episode on Jammu and Kashmir. Sreemoy is a senior editor at Firstpost. He writes on foreign policy, politics, and defense related issues. He's an experienced journalist and has previously been associated with leading publications such as the Times of India, Telegraph, DNA, and the Statesman. So, Muthu, we'll start with you.
Sure.
Can you summarize the recent FDI rules put in place by the government for digital media?
Yeah. So the government has put this out more in the nature of a clarification. There was a press note 4 in September 2019 that actually brought the digital media under the purview of FDI. But there were a lot of gray areas in that, and transactions were getting halted or etc. So because of that, the government had put out a clarification specifying exactly what are the segments that are getting covered under this press note 4. And so that took almost a year from September 19 to now in October 20. And three specific areas they have put out, as in standalone websites, apps, etc., that cover news and current affairs. So that comes under the FDI very clearly. And like as you mentioned, the scope of regulation has moved from MeitY to Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. The second segment is news aggregators. So you have your daily hunts and Google News and InShots and all of those news aggregators. They are all covered under the FDA restriction now. And the third is the news agencies, your ANIs and PTIs of the world. So there are press articles and on whether people upload a lot of things in Facebook and Twitter, and whether those will still come under these regulations. On the plain reading of it, as well as expert opinion, it is no, because these are user-generated content. The largely the platforms don't have their own their own news generation, or even cannot be classified as news aggregators. So Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, etc., do not come under this purview. But Google News will definitely be this thing, as in it is like a daily hunt, etc. It will get covered. So what is the crux of the regulation is that these were largely unregulated sector. They came under the automatic FDI route in the past. Now they do come under the regulated sector with 26% cap on FDI ownership, foreign direct ownership. This is actually, so to say, making it on par with what has been the regulation for the print media. So print media always had FDA restriction on 26%. So Swarajya actually is a print media, monthly print magazine. So we do come under, we are not affected by this regulation. We have always been under the 26% FDA cap. And so the they have also given a grandfathering provision where whoever has already exceeded this limit will have up to 12 months to regularize the their ownership and bring it below the 26% restriction. While the government has positioned it as a liberalization of the sector, actually it has brought it down very clearly. It has brought down the ownership, which used to be 100% and under automatic route in the past, to 26% and under approval route now. But this is not new to India. World over, across the sea, there are 3, 4 sectors that are always under approval route or restrictions for foreign investments. Financial sector, for instance, or defense, like that. Media is also under foreign ownership restrictions in several parts of the world. So that's in summary this thing. There are two small additions that they have made. One is employing foreign employees, non-Indian employees, more than 60 days would require prior name clearance, and if the name is not approved for any reason whatsoever, the onus is on the company to terminate their services. And second is the CEO of the organization has to be necessarily an Indian passport holder. So that, in summary, is the regulation that is brought.
Sure. Thanks for the detailed summary, Muthu. I have a follow-up question for you. So, apart from the FDI rules, the government also changed the supervision of digital media from Ministry of Electronics and IT to the Information Broadcasting Ministry. So, what is the implication of this?
Yeah, so it's a natural flow of things, Srivatsa, because this is not applicable to all and every website. It very clearly makes a distinction only those that have news and current affairs, those that cover news and current affairs. And that naturally, as in the way it is defined for radio or it is defined for television. Even in television, for example, the news and current affairs channels have a separate FDA restrictions, general entertainment category, and others do not have such restrictions, have much lesser restrictions. So it is a natural outcome that the supervision moves from MeitY, which takes care of more the technology aspects and things like that, to information and broadcasting, which covers the news and current affairs.
Sure. Sreemoy, coming over to you, some commentators are calling these moves as political. They're saying that the government actually wants to control the narrative through these changes. What's your view on that?
Hi, thanks for inviting me. Obviously there will be some opposition to these moves. There are some who makes these criticisms based on their political opinion about the government. So those are not to be taken seriously. There will always be some voices who speak more from their political bias against the government than a reasoned critique of what the government has done. That said, there is always a tendency on part of the government to interfere, and I think I will take a nuanced position on this. I think that we have to watch how the government goes about it. But there is another side to this whole debate, and that is something which we have watched very closely during the US elections. We have noticed how the big tech, specifically the companies which run social media, which practically runs our lives, including serving as gatekeepers for the digital media, because the digital media by themselves are not, they don't have the reach, or for instance, they do have their online presence, but they depend on these social media players for their reach, for their outreach. For instance, any website would have hyperlinks to the social media, the websites which many users will use, and in turn that will be used by others. So they depend on their outreach for these social media giants. Now, when these social media giants, if left unregulated, they can play havoc with the narrative. We have seen this in the US elections. The Hunter Biden story was practically killed before before the elections. None of the mainstream media outlets in the US were ready to post it, and Twitter played a very big role in that. I mean, there were journalists in India who were penalized just for posting that story. They didn't have a comment of their own. I mean, this is incredible. And so I would think that if the government is doing this, I wouldn't mind the government taking a stand on this, because we cannot have foreign-run social media giants interfering with the political discourse in India. That's a dangerous thing. And I think the government has a right to play the referee here. And I wouldn't mind the government taking, if needed, a censorious position, or sort of calling the social media giants out. We know of a recent incident where Twitter sort of mentioned Leh as not part of India, and then they were
Yeah.
pulled up, and then they had subsequently, they were forced to change their position. So I think the government's presence is necessary, and I don't think that we can take a very libertarian position on this, because at the end of the day, we are democracies, and democracies are by their very nature are very open to manipulations by private players and other malignant actors. I'm sorry to say that some of these social media giants are acting as malignant actors, and that does call for regulation.
No, absolutely, I agree. I mean, there were disclaimers put on President Trump's post when he questioned the veracity of the elections. But in India, you saw the opposition literally questioning, the Bihar elections, and there were no such disclaimers put. So you do make some very valid points. Uh, Now, Shrimoy, I have a follow up to you in terms of digital media. So, at when it all started, digital media was thought that to be an alternative to mainstream media. But it just feels like the entrenched players in digital are getting bigger, and the new entrants struggle. What's your view on that?
I think that this question has two parts. One part is plain and simple economic part. Um, as long as the legacy media did not take the digital media seriously, the smaller players on the digital space had a bit more freedom. They had a bit more leeway. There were many startups who, in fact, my website is one where I work, Firstpost. It's purely a digital media creation. Um, so I think in the initial stages, the legacy media did not take the digital media seriously, or it sort of failed to understand the importance digital media or led by social media would play in our lives. And when they finally got their act together, I think they simply had too much money power to overwhelm the newbies. If you talk about the legacy players, they come from very deep pockets. They also have integrated presence. And so it is easier for them to sort of crowd out the younger players, get the talent on board, retain talent. They can offer packages which the newer players will probably not be able to. That is one part. The second part is that the media space, like any other ventures, can only thrive if they have VC backing, capitalist backing or finance backing. Now, I'm not a finance person, I'm not an economist, but I do not think that um, the bubble has lasted. I think many there was this great hope that when the digital media came along, that it would be the new media, that it would attract a lot of talent, it would drive revenues. That hasn't happened. So I think that has also led to some of the people who would be financing these startups take a second look, and they're probably gone with the legacy media, or thinking that since they are the guys who have been there for a long time, it would probably be better if we invest there. So that is one part. The second part is the cultural part. I think initially when digital media came along, led, and also there's a bit of integration with social media here. It democratized speech in a huge way. We had people who were initially called the silent majority. The silent majority suddenly gained a voice, and this democratization of the media actually changed the political discourse in India. And I would say that Narendra Modi's coming to power in 2014 had a lot to do with it. Had it not been for the social media explosion in the first decade of the new millennium, I doubt whether we would have seen this kind of a political revolution, as it were, happening in India. I think BJP's rise has been led by the social media revolution, by the technological revolution. So that part was there. But then the problem with this, and we are subsequently finding it out, is that social media also has another side. What social media does, and digital media to a certain extent definitely does the same thing. I'm sort of interchanging between the two. What they do is that they take out the middle from the discourse, and they kind of take extreme positions either on the right or on the left. And more often than not, websites or digital media publications who initially started with an idea that we would be centrist and we would take either libertarian view or we would go with the very balanced approach, they find that they are being pushed by their clientele to take extremely ideological positions either on the right or on the left. It is more on the left because of the fact that most of the media space which exists in India comes from the leftist side. The universities and the college campuses. In that way, we emulate the American system. It is happening more on the left. But what has happened is that it has led to completely take away the middle from the discourse. And when that happens, when both sides take ideologically different positions and go into their different silos, then the middle people who were there, who were interested in the political discourse, they eventually become disinterested. A neutral reader would immediately know from the website what sort of argument it would make, and so that person will probably not give the mental energy needed to read a 1,000-word article, knowing fully well that the article writer name already he would know that what sort of argument he's peddling. So that is, I think, harming media industry in a way, because you are not engaging the wider public and they're being oblivious. They initially were interested, but then it has been driven to two different silos, and we are almost mirroring what has happened with the print.
Sure, sure. Great points, Sreemoy. I'll come to both of you on the next question. Maybe I'll start with you, Muthu. So do you think that digital media has become like a clone of mainstream media in the way it, approaches news and the way it works?
The digital media is obviously much faster to respond. So nobody, as in, I like that Firstpost ad when they launched, as in why go to the forest and kill the trees and make the paper and wait for the next day to see the news when you can see it in an instant immediately. So that cycle of news reaching, etc., have immediately, as in that is compressed to a very great extent. But in terms of opinion, I would say I would agree with Sima, as in the sense mainstream media had the bias as in very few centers, and the same thing is getting reflected in digital media as well. I just had one point on Srimoy's this thing. These FDI restrictions, unfortunately, do not touch any of these social media guys. As in your Facebook and Twitter and Google can create, as in the sense, can create havoc, so to say, the way they have been, irrespective of this FDI restrictions, because one, they do not fall under the purview of this news and current affairs. Two, they do not reside in India, so to say. Okay, so they can practically run this entire operations without a permanent establishment in India, if it comes to that. Today they do have, but if it comes to that, they can do. So the restrictions, the FDI restrictions do not apply to any of them. I hope some other form of, I won't say restriction, but some other form of supervision and authority where one can go and report and seek redressal if there is a genuine issue, etc., are in place. As in, if not anything, at least a self-regulatory organization where these things, standard protocol and codes and ethics are followed by these guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think with social media, the biggest black box is, the algorithms that they use. We have no idea. They are not open source. We don't know how they decide something is fake news or something is not. So regulation more focused on that would probably be helpful. Sreemoy, I know you talked a bit about how digital media is becoming like mainstream media. Would you like to add whether it's reaching there, or where it is in terms of evolution in this aspect?
See, a part of it is probably the fact that the way we sort of present news, digital media. I think and I'm talking about not just I'm talking about solely the people, the organizations who have digital presence. For them to make a difference in or to sort of market their brand differently and to gain in popularity, a very good thing would be to send reporters on the field and cover the story on the ground rather than using the legacy media as this primary source of news and then commenting on that or aggregating news. For that, you need financial clout. I think this is where digital media sort of needs to focus. I think the stomach for online commentary and blogging is probably dying. It exploded during the first half of the new decade, and even in after 2010 onwards, till 2020, I think it had a fairly good run. We've had bloggers and commentators having very sort of dedicated clientele. But I think now there is a bit of fatigue setting in, and also the fact that blogging and commenting has become very commonplace. Anyone can do that, so that the novelty is gone. I think what we need now is old-fashioned reporting, where we need to dispatch the reporters to the places where the event is occurring. I think Swarajya does a very good job there. It has a reporter whom I really hugely admire. I'm talking about Swati Goel
Yeah,
Sharma, who's
absolutely.
doing some stellar work. We need more journalists like her who goes to the actual scene of the event and reports from there and takes a very honest approach to reporting. So that I think would make a big difference. But it is obviously capital intensive. I think Muthu will be in a better position to tell me whether that is feasible for a social media, a sort of a digital platform. That entirely I think depends on the finances.
Yeah. See, the what has happened on the economics of running a digital media is that anyone who had thought of launching it thinking that the source of revenue will be primarily Google ads is just gone, because the unending inventory of websites and this thing has resulted in a huge supply demand mismatch, and hence the prices of digital advertisements have been crashing, and so it is just not won't cover your cost of producing a story definitely anywhere near that. So Swarajya had initially started with that as the main source of this thing, but quickly realized that it's a mug's game. There is not much money left there. So we pivoted to a subscription-based model. As in earlier, we were thinking that the print will be subscription driven and digital will still be advertisement driven. It doesn't work like that. As in we realized very quickly, thankfully, and pivoted to a subscription-based model. And that seems to be fairly okay. As in people today, because of this glut of low quality news and opinions, and because of even fake news and etc., people are willing to pay a price to read good quality content. So Swarajya has positioned itself as that and as a subscription-driven model. We have seen several of the new startups who are doing that. For example, Ken is a subscription-only model and has attracted a tremendous amount of capital, more so even from many Indian entrepreneurs and angel investors who had backed. Yes, Ken did have some foreign direct investment. I'm not sure it is crossed 26%, but it is there is enough capital. See, the kind of capital that we are talking of for this digital media is not in any scale compared to any of those traditional industries. So to that extent, there is enough capital, domestic capital that is available. This FDI restriction, so to say, this narrative that it is going to choke this industry, starve it of capital, etc., is not this thing. If your story is right, you have a viable business model and not a story of unending losses forever with the hope that Rupert Murdoch will come and buy you out at some point of time. That is not, there is no, that story no investor is willing to buy. But if you have a viable business model and a good this thing as in path to profitability, enough Indian capital is available to help these digital media outlets grow.
So, Muthu, I mean, we saw, HuffPost has been bought by BuzzFeed. Do you think this trend has already set in where, digital media is kind of on that slope where it's going down?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think not, definitely not in India. I think we have a long way to go. The number of people, as in the sense, with the access to data enabled mobile phones has only increased at a rapid pace only in the last 3, 4 years, thanks to Geo. and the news content, regional news content, as in vernacular language news content, etc., have definitely not reached that pace. So to that extent, as in digital media is likely to have a very good run, at least for the next few years in India. In terms of traffic, in terms of revenue model, in terms of profitability, that's a different story. That depends on case-to-case individual entities, how they are positioning themselves. And yeah, I don't think we have reached anywhere near saturation on that part.
Sure. Both of you spoke about feet on the ground needed for journalism. Uh, do you think that citizen journalism, where you have freelance kind of reporters who have and with access to data, so they can send stories quickly, they can shoot videos and send stories and all of that, is that something that is in the horizon for digital media? Maybe you can come in first, Muthu, and then Srimoy.
Sure. As in a sense, whether it is the citizen journalism model or the stringer model, whichever works, but cost of disintermediation, as in the sourcing the news and getting it into a digital media platform has come down drastically. You don't need a high-end heavy equipment camera to go there to shoot, to record, etc. As in your handheld phone is doing much better job than what heavy cameras used to do even 5, 10 years back. So to that extent, and it has reached that kind of mobile phones have reached every part of the country. So sourcing that is not a problem. As in the aggregation of that authenticity, the bias or spin that you are able to avoid in those things, those are the challenges I feel. But yes, source-based journalism, direct access to the where the event is happening, is already taking shape and will be a big part of the content of digital media platforms in the years to come.
Srimoy, your thoughts?
I I'll reserve my comment on this one because we have seen the citizen based model. I think it has been pushed to a certain extent over the years, but for reasons which are not very clear to me, it has not really taken off. But I agree with Muthu that the cost of producing these sort of news has come down drastically because of the way the technology revolution has taken place, the way the data has reached the far corners of the country. So it is easy for someone in one remote location to sort of uh, report on an event. But to what extent it is possible to make it a product? Because at the end of the day, any news item which you are delivering is also a product. To what extent that raw data can be molded into a product, the back end version of it, the logistical chain that needs to be done, I'm not very sure of that. I think obviously we'll see some sort of a shift there. uh, but if you take the West as a model, because their market has evolved a lot quicker than we have, I don't see that thing happening in the West. Obviously, we are not demographically not the same. Our diversity is more. We are also, as a country, we are much larger country. But if you are to, because some of the things that are happening in our media has already happened in the West in terms of print giving way to the digital space. So if I were to take some cues from there, I would. I'm not very sure whether citizenship model has worked there, and I'm not very sure whether it will work here. Once again, I'm not very clear about the reasons why.
Yeah, as an investment banker wearing my other hat, there's a crying need, and there's a huge business opportunity for somebody who just sources these and licenses it or aggregates it for regular media platforms. And then I'm sure I will be willing to pay for a story coming from interior Gujarat or interior Uttar Pradesh without having to send my reporter all the way there to go and shoot it. So the cost arbitrage is too huge. I'm sure if somebody builds a business model around it, it's going to be a huge success.
There's one thing I'd like to add, though. I
Sure.
completely agree with Puthu here. But there's one thing, interesting thing, which I'd like to add. I think sometimes the diversity of India works against this model in a way that we don't really fully understand. For instance, I'm saying we have seen this many times that reporters tend to cover events that happen in Delhi and Mumbai more vigorously
Yeah.
than that what happens in the interior parts of the east or the west or even the south. It is not simply given too much importance. stories, and I know this for a fact because I stay in one part of the country where we have a political leader who's quite authoritarian in a ways. We don't really see that being made into an issue of the sort that we would know. Even if Yogi Adityanath were to do a certain thing, it would be immediately a big headline. But a certain thing which Mamata Banerjee would do, which is far more authoritarian in nature, will not get that sort of exposure. Some of it is media bias. Some of it is media bias, but it's also the fact that it is called the tyranny of distance. So I think someone who's reporting from the interior of Gujarat, for someone who stays, for instance, in Bengal, I don't know whether that person will find it relevant, because this is a little different from the West, because there is a lot more homogeneity of language and culture. It is more complex in India, so that might be a problem, though it's a theoretical. I'm not really sure whether that's.
Muthu, you wanted to add something?
No, I just wanted to joke about the tyranny of distance.
Yeah, that was my line. He took that away. Okay, Sreemoy, one thing we have seen with digital media is that there are a lot of clickbaity headlines which are creative and can be misleading just to get viewers on a page. Where does this stop? I mean, is this something that we should be worried about?
I think BuzzFeedization of media is a global problem. It is not just an Indian problem. I think what many in the media industry have figured out is that today's youth have a very short attention span, and unless you give them something which is really very clickbaity, they are not likely to click on that. And if they're not likely to click on that, then there's no point. So I think that there's been a dumbing down in general. In India, I would also attribute part of that to our education system. I think the education system in India is such that it is mass producing degrees, and to an extent that is incredible. I mean, we are getting students who are getting 99, 100% marks these days. But when it comes to reasoned debates, when it comes to logically following their thoughts, when it comes to presenting a flawless piece of writing without any obvious grammatical error, there is a lot which is wanting. I can tell you from experience, because I've been in print media for 15 years, and I have seen, educated graduate students who've come from prestigious universities come up with, with articles which are not grammatically sound. They're very elementary errors, which leads me to question the kind of education which happens in our education institutions. So I think generally there's been a dumbing down, and that is reflected in various ways, and media is just one facet of it. The media industry sort of thinks that if you are to give a headline which would make the reader think, instead of thinking, he or she would simply shy away. So let's give them something extremely clickbaity so that they can click on it, and then we'll see how it goes on from there. It generally sort of leads to very sort of claustrophobia, and I think that it also adds to polarization, because you cannot always sort of make all the ideological positions of a certain piece into a capsule and then deliver it so that it can easily understand. Sometimes you want the reader to be engaged in a very nuanced debate. You want him or her to think in different ways. But if you're going to dump it all down into an easy to digest capsule, then it won't capture it. So that is inevitable. I think this is also a reflection of the cultural bankruptcy that we have right now.
Sure. And so, Sreemoy, what's your view on the whole credibility conundrum? Mainstream media rejects digital media outlets as cheesy, and they think they're not worth their attention. So, what do you think about all of this?
I don't know. I'm not sure I agree with that, because I think digital media, and certainly debates on social media are driving the debates in the traditional, the legacy media. I've seen this happen very quickly before my eyes. Initially, there would be a time when the legacy media would not consider digital platforms worth giving any interest to, any importance to, but they have increasingly expanded their online presence. I'm talking about the giants like, let's say, the Times of India, Hindustan Times, Indian Express, the Hindu. They all have very solid online presence now, and they're very receptive to the online debates as well. Whatever trend is happening, they're these websites are among the first to come up with a short 150-word piece on what is happening and how it is to break it down. I think they're giving a lot of importance to digital media these days. And as I said at the very beginning, that initially the digital space was free for startups who were coming out with these fresh ideas, and now increasingly they're being crowded out by these more more these legacy media were more muscle power. But I wouldn't agree with the argument that they don't give importance to digital media. I think digital media is still driving conversation. There are some niche outlets which still uh, sort of generate a lot of debate, and that gets reflected in the legacy media as well. I won't agree with that.
Sure. Muthu, what's your view on this? Since you also run mainly a digital platform.
Yeah. So, I mean, see, the earlier, even from I'm just seeing from the economics perspective, the advertisers did not have any say or any feedback loop on whether if they're spending on a Hindu print ad, what is the kind of response rate, etc. They just used to go by the circulation or readership surveys once a year done. Now you know what all the this thing as in fraud and allurement that happens to manipulate these leadership surveys and circulation, etc. So, but if they have digital media, their mainstream media's presence in digital media helps us gain a decent amount of feedback loop. So whether those articles are shared on Facebook, WhatsApp, etc., whether those articles have this thing, so they have so they do take digital media fairly seriously. And if not for genuine feedback on journalism, definitely for the advertising money, they do take that fairly seriously.
Thank you. Thank you. So this has been a fascinating discussion. There's one last question I have for both of you, and I'll come to you, Sreemoy, first on this. So, what do you think the future holds for digital media? How do you see it, evolving from here?
I'm optimistic. I think digital media will survive. I think because it is the way to go. And if you and the way data revolution has taken place in India, I think digital media is the obvious way to reach out to the new middle class which will emerge. See, eventually we will have a very large middle class in India. We are about decade and a half behind China. And if you see what's happening in China, you'll notice that the middle class there is extremely powerful. That it's a very large constituency. We will take even more time to reach there, and our middle class will be it will be divided into many more layers perhaps. But what is undeniable is that we are shifting from a mainly a sort of the economy model is slowly shifting, and we'll have these cities will serve as nerve centers of economy, and then eventually more and more people will move out of agriculture and move into the cities. So you'll have these urban centers, and then there are the new middle class. They're ready to engage with the world. They'll be eager. They'll be hungry for news and the things that interest them. So I am optimistic for digital media. But obviously everything must be qualified. This optimism is also qualified. It will depend a lot on how a sustainable model is found. I think eventually a subscription-only model is going to survive. If you look at the print media, it is also a subscription-driven model. It is another thing that subscription prices were kept very low due to the ad revenue which was generated. But as Muthu points out, that there is simply so many players in the field in digital media right now that due to the supply-demand mismatch, the ad prices have been driven down. So obviously there has to be a shift towards a subscription-driven model, and there only people who are doing quality work, and this has been true of all generations. This is a timeless concept. If you are doing quality work, you have a greater chance of survival. If you're doing quality work, then obviously you will have more subscribers, and eventually that will be sustainable.
Muthu,
Yeah,
closing
yeah,
comments.
I'm quite optimistic on the future of digital media because, as in the sense, like I said, a lot more people will be accessing these news through their mobile phones and tablets and things like that. My only caveat or worry is that the distribution channel is, as in the sense today, choked, so to say, by these social media giants. The sooner we find a workaround to that and have lot more distribution channels, as in it could be different types of news aggregators, In terms of profitability and viability, as in subscription, largely subscription-based model is the way to go. We have few successful examples. I'm sure many more are likely to come.
So there's one point I would like to add to what Muthu has said. He makes an excellent point about the social media acting as gatekeepers. I think if we look at what has happened to China, and India has a lot to learn from there, you find China has not simply let these social media giants to enter their shores. And obviously there is a question on to what extent India, being a democracy, can emulate those policies. But eventually, if the social media giants behave like the way they do, they act as super regulators, a few woke Californians sitting in California deciding what's best for the rest of the world, if they act like that, then they're going to push democracies like India towards taking regulatory positions. And in the end of the day, we'll be probably forced to sort of bar their entry or create sort of Indian options or alternatives for those. I think Indian market demands an Indian alternative. And the way they are behaving, I think it will probably, it's a matter of time before we come up with our own solutions. That will probably be better for everyone.
Excellent points, Muthu and Sreemoy. Well, this brings us to the end of a fascinating podcast. So thank you very much, Muthu and Sreemoy, for your time. This has been a great discussion.
Thank you for tuning in. This podcast was brought to you by the team at Bharatvaarta. If you liked this podcast, then don't forget to share, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite platforms. We're available on Anchor, Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, Breaker, YouTube, and a host of other platforms. We started Bharatvaarta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you do wish to offer us any feedback on the content or anything else, do reach out to us on social media or get in touch with us on our website, www.bharatvaarta.in. The links are in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.